Hey, I'm Jacob Cooperman, and you were watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with Todd Atkins and Miguel Iturrate. Todd has been involved in covering combat sports since the 1990s, and Miguel has match-made over 200 different events amongst various promotions worldwide. Please subscribe and be on the lookout for future episodes. As for me, you can check me out at Gloves Up on YouTube and Coop TV with 3 O's on Instagram. Thank you guys, and enjoy the episode.
All right, so the moment many of you have been waiting for, Miguel Iturrate is here. And I know a lot of you miss Miguel when he's on hiatus. And in the comments, I see, so we didn't lose him. He's here. You don't have him as much, but it's even more impactful when he's here. So we're going to be doing kind of a news recap. And I kind of filled him in on some things. He's been a little busy. But we're going to touch on the Pereira losing Ankalaev first. Miguel, I kind of want to let you say what you think the impact of that is to the UFC, because I've seen some people say it's pretty big because Pereira's, their most active and probably biggest star at the moment. What do you think?
Uh, I think Pereira was a guy that, for a brief minute was talked about there as, being an all-time great, as, being a pound for pound guy and this sort of thing. And, we know he's a killer striker, but he, he's got limitations to his game. And, Adesanya wasn't going to be able to exploit those. And so far they put him in, Jiri. I love Jiri, but Jiri is another guy that wasn't really going to exploit his weaknesses, and that's what this Ankalaev guy did. And now we've got 4 Russian champions.
Yeah, with two waiting in the wings that I think probably could win their fights with Hamzat and Shavkat. So that's something we'll touch on a little bit later. But what do you think the impact of Pereira losing is? I think if I had to guess, they'll probably put him in a rematch. But I feel like Ankalaev, because of his skill set, has more ways to win a rematch than Alex. Alex is either going to strike and knock his opponent out, or he's not. It's not like he's
Yeah,
going to come up with some brand new stuff.
yeah, there's not a chance that he might, but I think, yeah, you're right. I think we've got a little bit of a guy that you can exploit the taking and striking away from him, and then from there the fight becomes a lot easier. And well, like I said, this Ankalaev is the first guy who actually, kind of took him out of his game, backed him up a little bit. Um, was able to actually strike with him. At least his strikes were effective during the fight. But um, it was a little bit of a methodical win. They may do a rematch, and you hope that maybe something a little more exciting happens. I think that's part of the problem with the Dagestani style, is that it's so straightforward, and that at times people find it boring. Khabib's been accused of being boring. Uh, Makachev has been accused of being boring. Not that they're so boring, but they will take the straightest path to a victory. And if that's, this was a methodical win. It's kind of more exciting if Pereira does his thing, but it is what it is. The best guy won, and I guess that's at the end of the day what you sort of want. But I don't think it's good for business or the bottom line to have all kinds of these Russian champions. Um, Pereira, I think he had made a name for himself and stuff, but he's not exactly, a guy that you can uh, market to the American audience very well with his English, or lack of. And uh, they're really hurting for, um, a presence by American athletes in this sport now. Shout out to one of our fans out there that I was talking in one of the podcasts about, where's the second generation of guys, where people training. And I mentioned Matt Serra as an example, and he called me out on it. He's right. Sarah bought us Weedman and a few other guys after that, um, along with Longo. But um, you know, uh, I
We're
would
talking
counter
about
so
now, though. So did he really? Was he right? I mean,
yeah, no. I
now
mean,
I don't think
but
so.
yeah, right. But that's what I was going to say is, but where, so, but the thing is, that there's supposed to be some carryover. So where's Weedman's student? Yeah,
Where's
and again,
Sterling's student? Sterling was his last one, I think.
yeah, and Sterling might still be active. So, like Weedman's retired. But Weedman probably went off to go do real estate because the sport's just not does not have the money or generate the
Well,
money.
he's in the
Um,
GFL. He's in
Weedman's
the G.
fighting again.
Yeah, he's in the GFL.
Has the GFL done a show?
No, but they drafted him.
Yeah, I know. That doesn't mean he's fighting. And
Yeah, I
he's
know.
still
I
retired.
agree. I agree.
He's still retired, just like Vanderlei is. I mean, they can use his picture and do whatever they want. The GFL, um, I think the GFL is somehow maybe they think that MMA is comedy, and they thought my act is funnier than the PFL's. And I think that's how I can sum it up until the GFL actually starts putting people in the ring, and it's not a geriatric league, and not drawing up posters and you know paying, for a studio set for people to do a draft. And then, again, like I said, the fighters all show up in their kitchen to do the press conference. It shows you how much they cared about it, you know. And if you're going to do a draft and you're going to do a draft like that, they had a nice studio with a couple of talking heads, you know, compare that to the NBA draft where probably the top 30 players are present and accounted for, and there to put on the hat for the team or the shirt for the team that they were drafted in and things like that. When you hear draft, that's kind of what you expect in the USA, in terms of the NFL draft, the NBA draft. If you're going to use that technique in that format, do it well. Don't have guys talking from their kitchen in t-shirts.
Yeah, I said the
So
draft for the Vietnam War was better than the GFL draft.
more popular.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, it's definitely the GFL is a zero right now, a zero, in my book. Not that my book matters much. People can say my book is a zero, and I'm okay with that. I can take that. But until they show me something, besides, talk, um, and even if they show me something, like I said, the PFL, I guess, is past this threshold. But like I said, when one came about, because at that point we were going through so many leagues that would pop up and die. I said, talk to me when you do 20 shows, and I guess that would be my threshold for the GFL. If they even get to 20 shows under their belt, I'd be very surprised. Anyway, but the point is the reason we trailed off in the GFL is because Weedman has not produced a student. I see guys. There are more fighters, more former fighters that have elected to do podcasts to try to monetize rather than train another student.
Yeah. And John Fitch had talked about there's more money in wrestling now than there used to be, and he thinks that's why you're seeing less American wrestlers choose to go into MMA because there's more avenues now for them to make some money rather than getting punched in the face. So I think the talent pool compared to Eastern Europe, where the guys take it extremely serious. And the other thing he said was, you know, when you're training Dagestanis, which he did at AKA, you never have to worry about them being late. You never have to worry about them complaining, making some excuse for why they can't train. He said
Right.
he would live in Vegas and he would meet with other fighters from other areas. And, some days you thought you were going to get some sparring in and you ended up hitting mitts because no one showed up. Or
Sure.
half the people that said they were going to be there wouldn't be there. He said when Khabib brought his 30 or so Dagestanis, they were going to be on time every time. They're going to be at practice every day. They were ready to get after it, and that still holds true today. You don't. They just they
Right. Those
want it
guys, I
more,
mean,
and they're willing to fight for less. You know.
yeah, it's a whole mindset. They were born, not born that way, but they were brought up that way. That's why, listen to Khabib talk about Vegas. He's disgusted by the city. They don't like to be there. Whereas other guys, like Connor, you know, Connor falls for every sin out there,
Hmm.
right? And these guys, they were brought up in such a way that they look at that city and people that have those vices with disdain. They just simply are not impressed by it.
Hmm.
Whereas, um, they're impressed by work ethic and by working hard, and that seems to have been lost in the American talent pool.
Yeah, it's definitely an issue. UFC will have to work around it, or maybe just not sign any more athletes from that area. Otherwise, they're going to
As you
get
said, yeah,
overrun.
yeah, as you said offline, though, if you're going to have the best fighters, you
You have to
know,
have them.
and that's the thing that's where again, and I know we're going to talk about the Dana and boxing and stuff, and one of the things that they said that with their boxers and stuff that these guys are going to have access to the UFC training centers. The UFC training centers seem to be worthless. They're not producing American fighters. If they're going to import fighters from other places and maybe take money from them to train or whatever, you're still not addressing the point of you have America is your biggest market, and you're starting to have a dwindling talent pool from your biggest market. It won't be long before it's not your biggest market anymore, and then that's okay. But then you'll really be in a situation where in the States you're going to have a lot of people who don't watch the sport.
Yeah.
How many guys with you know ugly beards who can't talk English are the American people going to actually follow, especially in today's climate?
Yeah. I think it's a matter of convenience for them with the PIs. As far as at least the one in Vegas. But you're right, the other ones aren't producing anything. PI
Well,
Mexico, PI China. Where's the Mexican fighters? Where's the Chinese fighters that are supposed to be the next? They're not there.
yeah, I would want to do a health check. Like I mean, is Mexico
I don't
and
know if it
China?
exists. Does it
Yeah,
exist?
are they even open anymore? Or we know they put more than a decade ago some money into opening centers up all over the country and all over the world and things like that. Maybe there's still one operating in Abu Dhabi, but it probably has a sponsor. Um, yeah, it's a very interesting and strange situation that they're letting the American market go. But again, we talked about too that the American fighters, at this point, you know, to fight for 10-10 in the UFC is a joke. And again, it's although money has gone up a great deal, the number of fights and they're not allowed to fight outside of so it's tantamount to fighting for 2-2 a few a decade and a half ago. You can't live off of 10-10. If you lose and you pay 20% to your trainer and taxes and this, you go home with enough money to live for a month, a few weeks,
Yeah.
depending on your life circumstance. But you know, um, you, it's just not a viable career option still. But it is for a Dagestani.
Right. And they don't need a PI. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, they'll, they've got their mountains. They've got um a history and a background of athletics and athletic trainers. Some of them are probably adapting over to MMA. Maybe they've got a little bit of that dog street fighter in you, like which never hurts. I.e., like Mark Coleman. Mark wasn't a polished striker, but he sure could kick ass, and that's what got him through, along with the other wrestling. So they have wrestling and they have discipline over there, and then the rest of it, they'll work on, and they will work on it. Whereas like I said, the Americans um, tend to think of the end state and not how to get there.
Yeah. Kind of piggybacking off that, obviously, a huge story came up. Dana White, Turkey combining to join forces to fix boxing. And I know you definitely got some opinions on this. You're a boxing kind of historian. And you also have some opinions on the Ali Act. So maybe let's just start with Dana Turkey teaming up first.
I don't think this is teaming up. I think this is Turkey hiring Dana. So what Dana's figured out is he figured out his first attempts into boxing, including offering Anthony Joshua $1 billion contract or something like that, was one of the big rumors. And he's talked about boxing for since the beginning, kind of thing,
Yeah, 15
about
years
getting in.
easily. Yeah.
And so somehow he's a billionaire, but somehow he's figured out how to get somebody else to pay for his entry. So he's in there now with zero risk.
Yeah.
And that's what I see it as. I see it as a guy that even Dana has to look at as a guy who has got next level different money than he does. And that's where he put his polish and his game into it. He talked him into it, and that's the guy putting up all the money for this. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it turns into um purchasing maybe Eddie Hearn's uh boxing company, which would give them some assets and some contracts. Anthony Joshua's, got beat again recently, so he's a lot less valuable than he ever was. Um, really, and you don't want to say kind of morbid things, but really, it is only a matter of time till Bob Arum is there, is not there rather. And if you were somehow to be able to consolidate, you could dream, but um, you know, one of the comparable libraries and comparable legacies to Bob Arum is Don King's, and Don's no spring chicken either. You could see, and his family doesn't appear to be in boxing. Every time Don rolls out, he still puts on that 75-year-old American flag jacket and rolls around every once in a while. Um, but he's not in boxing anymore. And if he's gone, his family would probably do well to get, a couple 100 million for his library or whatever assets he has. He doesn't seem to have any fight contracts, so it might not be worth that much. But if you can combine Eddie Hearn, Don King, and Bob Arum's libraries and legacies and things into something you can build there, now you've got a real start in boxing. And you're going to need maybe a couple of $1 billion for that. And like I said, they just figured out a way to get somebody else to pay for it. Uh, and we'll see. We'll see what Endeavor does. We've always speculated when Endeavor and WWE got together, we speculated that boxing was going to be the next target, and they never really stopped talking about it. Now it looks like they've actually taken a concrete step. So you have to take them at their word. They haven't really, as we've said, they haven't really failed at doing anything that they said they're going to do. So shortly from this, we may see. The problem is that they have no respect for sport. These guys have only respect for the bottom dollar. So what you're going to see is marketable and good fights. You'll get fights like the UFC has good fights and good competition and stuff, but it's not true competition in that there are guys throughout the history of the sport under Dana that have been passed over because of marketability. And that's simply not the way sport works.
I don't think Turkey looks at the bottom line, though. He spends his money. He doesn't care. You know what I mean?
Right. And that's
He doesn't even care about a return. The first show they're going to do is in Times Square. They're not getting any money for it. They're not
no,
charging
but
anybody.
that's no. I suspect Turkey's doing it. I suspect the profits will go to Endeavor. I
Yeah.
suspect that that's what they figured out is somehow Turkey will put the money up for the purchases and get all the shine of being, the papa, the sponsor, the enabler. Maybe there'll be some monetary reward back to him in some way, shape, or form at some point, or maybe just a return on his investment. And then after he gets his money back on the investment, all the profits will go to Endeavor, or else they wouldn't do this.
Yeah. The other thing is, I think Turkey, like you said, he hired Dana. That doesn't mean he's just going to let him do whatever he wants. This is still his money, you know. And I saw
Oh no,
some of that.
I think Dana goes into this with command control. I think he wouldn't go into it otherwise. That's
Not
yeah.
necessarily, because they were on Pat McAfee, right?
Uh-huh.
And Turkey, he let out an announcement. Dana White was just like, he put his hand on his head, like he said, "We're going to do a show in Alcatraz," and Dana White was just, he even said, like Pat McAfee, like cut it off, because Turkey was just making it, and he said our first big show is going to be September 12th, and Dana was just like, Pat was like, "Are you just letting this guy just announce everything?" And he's like, "Not really, that's not not really how we planned to do this interview." But you know,
Yeah, but I think like look, it's clear that you know, no, nobody's going to tell the Saudis what to do. You got to get under on their good side in order for them um to put up the money, and then you have to give them some respect in terms of you've got to let them talk, let them do what they want, let them. But most of it is for prestige, and most of it is for
mhm.
um to almost it's like a publicity stunt for the country, and you have to think of their entire history of moving into sports as a publicity stunt for the country. That's what Saudi Arabia wants. They're opening up more, they're spending money on infrastructure and tourism, and they've made entries into tennis and golf and Formula One, and what it takes is to have one of the high-powered sheiks be interested in the sport, and then you've got an in there. So now they've got an interest in these combat sports, but at some point, the execution of this will all be Dana, and I don't think that Dana will. Yeah, they can make it out. He can make announcements in press conferences, and Dana had better not call him stupid. You know what I mean? Like he did the WWE guy that he berated. Dana is going to have to actually curtail, even if he disagrees with this guy. You're never going to hear it because that would be a killer step in insulting this guy. You can't do that. So, but Dana probably doesn't. Keep in mind when Dana was 30 and zero, they gave him command control of the UFC, and he's got that history to fall back on. That he took it from zero to where it is now in the stratosphere. So, and he can say that that was because they did exactly what he said, and he's going to want a lot of executive power um, in the boxing world as well. He's going to insist on it. So at the end of the day, they're going to do what he wants. And choosing, Times Square, Alcatraz, Machu Picchu, Angkor Wat, fucking Sophia Hagia, wherever they want to do in historic buildings or famous places or flashy locations on the fucking tip of the Eiffel Tower, wherever they want to do a show, or the Turkey says they're going to do a show, they'll do it. The, the money will be there to pay for whatever it takes to loosen the venue up, and they'll put boxing on there. And boxing does have still to this day, I think boxing is more acceptable worldwide than MMA. Even though MMA has made a big steps and into mainstream media, I think among a traditionalist audience, boxing is still a little more acceptable.
I do think that it's similar in that at times it's kind of down and then it goes up when there's a couple of big fights and then goes back down and that's what MMA does. It's on the tip of everyone's mind when they have very not as much, I would say, but like when McGregor hit his heights or when Rousey hit her heights, a lot of people were paying attention that normally wouldn't have. So I think they're similar in that regard.
Yeah, yeah, and right now boxing's kind of the Tyson Fury craze is over. The you could say the Joshua craze is over, or maybe you could say it never happened. I guess Joshua cashed in a few big checks, so you can say it's over. There's no heir apparent. Gervonta Davis is hot, um, but
He had a tough
you
fight
know,
his last time out though.
and you can only
Yeah.
go so far with 135 pounders. That's not what you need for worldwide marketing.
A lot of people
Uh,
think the debut show, September 12th, a lot of people think Canelo versus Crawford's going to headline it. What do you think if they pull that off?
Canelo might be. I, I think it's a high profile fight. Crawford's always carried the cross of not being a huge marketable guy. Nobody's ever really put huge bucks behind him to market him. I've thought I think Crawford is better than Mayweather. Like for my taste, the guy is an incredible boxer. Um, he might be, he might be too small for Canelo. Uh, um, I don't know how that one plays out. Canelo is, I guess you could count Canelo as the big star there. Canelo's been operating at much heavier weights. Um, you have to really put some money up to get Canelo down to even 160 at this point. Um, and 160 is two weight classes up from Crawford at welterweight. So uh, I'm not a fan of that disparity in the weight classes, especially less in boxing than in MMA. I don't like it in MMA either, but less in boxing. I think it makes more of a difference there. In MMA, with technique, maybe you can overcome a bigger guy. But in boxing, with a limited set of technique, your chances against a bigger guy are less. So it's a good fight on paper. It's a good name recognition fight. It's a good fight of you know uh like I said, I think I look at it at the pound for pound list, and I think Usyk is dominating the pound for pound list. I think I'm okay with that, but I'm not fond of heavyweights on the pound for pound list to begin with, because they start with the size. Um, you've got Inoue there, and Inoue is a hell of a boxer too, but he's smaller than Gervonta Davis, so you're not gonna be able to use him to conquer the world. Um, then you got Crawford. Those are generally the top three in the pound for pound boxing right now, and I think by far Crawford is far more skilled. Usyk is highly skilled and fantastic. I love Usyk also, but if they were the same size, Crawford's skill set is far and away more sophisticated.
You know,
So I'm a Crawford fan, but like I said, Crawford hasn't been able to break through as good as he is, and now you know he's in his 30s. He's no longer a young spring chicken too. Yeah, it would be great to see him finally get that type of payday for him. Um, he's also a little bit. I don't know how to quantify it, and I know it's probably old, and he's probably you know time has gone by and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, he tried to beat up a mechanic who was repairing his car, and he owed him money and he didn't pay for it, and he went to the guy's house and took his car back at kind of by force, and was like, who's going to stop Terrence Crawford, physically, if Terrence Crawford wants his car back? And that may be actually one of the things that held him back for so long. Is that he's got a little bit of that street, that Clarissa Shields kind of street tour where you know you can't market him to a general clean cut public. I don't know what held Crawford back, because like I said, I think far and away he's better than Mayweather. I think in his prime he would have smoked Mayweather.
another interesting thing that you may not have known about. A lot of people think Usyk had the inside track on this, UFC Turkey Alsheikh, combination, because he, after his last fight, challenged Alex Pereira, which was way out of left field.
Who was
Going
that?
Usyk,
Okay.
so a lot of people think he had, prior knowledge that this was going to go down. And, that's something that could also give them a little bit of interest in that they could take some guys from the UFC, very few, but they could take some and maybe put them up against some other guys.
Well, yeah, we'll see. We'll see. It's very interesting. You you look at Ngannou, and Ngannou may still have that boxing bug there. And now with Dana involved in boxing, you wonder if that's somehow going to be a block for Ngannou, or if it's somehow going to be give Dana the hooks back into Ngannou. Um, we've seen some high profile guys ask for their releases from the PFL because of inactivity and things like that. You could almost see Ngannou, um, if the proper money were on the other end or there were an option somewhere else, Ngannou would probably ask for his release from the PFL.
And what a coup that would be to bring him back after the PFL got him. A great, like, that'd be a great way to just start out with, like, like thumb in the eye to PFL.
Yeah,
Not
I
that the
think
UFC needs to, but it would just be something funny to do.
yeah, I think it would amuse Dana for sure. To have Ngannou sort of bend the knee, and as far as the PFL is concerned, it's like um stepping on a cockroach, I guess.
Yeah. And that this is a great thing to parlay into because you had mentioned about guys complaining about not getting activity. And so now the latest, and I think a guy who's important, a guy, the UFC wants him to, is Aaron Pico. And he's kind of in an Eddie Alvarez situation here where the PFL, they bought Bellator. He didn't sign with the PFL. And now he's in this matching period, which I think is a year. And Don Dave's not going to let him out of it. He's already come out and said, look, I'm not going to sign with you guys no matter what. And Don Dave's saying, yeah, well, you can sit for a year then. Because you signed a standard contract. This isn't like any other. It's pretty much standard for everybody. And we have a right to match for a year, and you can sit there if you don't want to do business with the UFC until then.
Yeah, and just like Bjorn Rebney, um, and like as you said, and you give him more credit than I do, but Bjorn did some good things, and that company was uh, on an upward trajectory when he left. And then he handed it over to Scott Coker, who was kind of a dud.
He didn't hand
Um,
it over. They made him leave.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, but the leadership went to him, is what I meant.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but Rebney had some things that he did that were positive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and but this it proved to be the bugaboo when you put yourself in a position of arrogance with the fighters, because most of the population will side with the fighters. Very few people are going to say Don Davis is right in this situation. Um, and Pico, as we talked about earlier in this podcast, Pico is very valuable because now you're talking about an American with some upside, which are very few and far between at this point. So maybe people would want to um, not see him. It really hurts him to sit him for a year out of spite. You take a year out of the prime of a guy who's going to have a 12 to 15 year career if he's lucky, and you're going to make him sit a year. When it's self-induced like Connor or John Jones, where they decide to take time off for their own reasons, so be it. But here's a guy who wants to fight. Your company can't give him fights, and you're going to prevent him from fighting elsewhere. You're taking money out of his kids' mouths. It's not a good PR move. But what do you expect from Don Davis except stupidity?
Yeah, but the UFC's not making him off. They're just going to sit around until the PFL can't match, and then they'll make him an offer.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, yeah, exactly. But either they're worried that the match may come, or that they may have to overpay or whatever. And the UFC, they're a business also, so they're going to handle this the same way. Pico's special because he's American and because this, but they can't treat him like he's too special. So they are going to treat him like everybody else in terms of the UFC. They don't. the he would look good on their roster, but it's not like their roster's like dying for Aaron Pico, you know. And if they don't handle him well and they bring him in and they put him in against killers right away, he'll be 0-2 fast, like they've done with Chandler and other people.
Right.
So that's what you kind of have to be careful for. The only person who's going to suffer for Don Davis's boorish activity here is Aaron himself, the athlete, the guy who can least the guy with the least money among billionaires toying with these guys. It's really just distasteful is not the right word. It's really, you know, offensive. I don't, you know, Don Davis is almost crossing the line here to actually really, I don't know, you know, criminal's not the right word, but maybe it should be.
But why buy Bellator if you're just going to let all the best guys go and you're not going to get any benefit from that? I mean, I guess you can fill out your roster with some of their undercard people, but
Right, but here's the thing: is telling a guy he can sit because they, you know, he told him that they're not going to sign with him and stuff like that. It doesn't benefit them either, you know. And so there's no benefit to what he's doing for the company. All the only benefit is to his ego, where, you know, like I said, he this is treating Aaron Pico like a chess piece, or a checker piece, and when the UFC is playing three-dimensional chess and he's playing checkers and he thinks it might be some type of advantage where it's not. It's only going to make their company look bad.
right. I do think they're making some smart moves in that. Look, all the people that were paying a lot, or these guys have these big contracts from Bellator. We're going to start from scratch here. We weren't making any progress with what we're doing. We're going to start over from scratch and build our own guys up, like Bjorn Rebney did. He didn't sign away anybody else's. All his fighters were guys who came up through the tournaments and, you know, got some notoriety that way.
Yeah, yeah. Eh, I don't think the European market is going to be enough to buoy the sport. You know, um, they seem to pay for football and soccer or whatever you want to call it at an extremely high level. I don't know if they can handle another big time sport. So I think it'll always be small in Europe. You know, market driven. They're British fighters. They have a couple of French fighters. You know, the Scandinavians seem to not be as prevalent as they once were. Um, you know, in Topuria, I guess you've got a Spanish fighter, but you know,
He's
it's
from
not like
Georgia,
Spain.
though.
Yeah, yeah, he speaks Spanish and
Yeah,
Hispanic, and lives in Spain. So I think you could. Well, the reason is you can market him in Spain. That's what's important.
sure.
But you know, if you're going to be on TV in, you know, moderately big markets like Italy and Sweden and things like that, without an Italian or Swedish fighter, you know, good luck.
Yeah. One other thing that I forgot to bring up on the Turkey Dana thing, and we had touched on this a little bit in a previous interview, was the Ali Act. Like guys are saying, okay, they're going to circumvent the Ali Act. I know you're not too crazy about the Ali Act. Um, Maybe you can kind of touch on that again since we were on that topic.
Well, you know, the Ali Act is supposed to have, put this way, it's like all criminals. The criminals are usually ahead of the enforcement, you know, and they figured out a way around the Ali Act, you know. So the Ali Act is supposed to force even handed, fair competition where the promoters are not in charge of fighters and the fighters are given fair title shots. So what boxing did is they went ahead and created five different titles, and each one of them walks around and acts like they're the biggest title. Meanwhile, none of them are. This is a situation where um, the sum of the parts is less than, you know, or I think you get what I mean. Let me try to organize this thought. So they say uh, some of the part is greater than the sum of the parts. You know, if something is good, that you made something big and great, and it's just the sum of the parts amount to more. This is a situation where the sum of the parts, all three of the five of the organizations or whatever, amount to less. In other words, none of the world titles are valued the way they should, and nobody's recognized as a world champion. Usyk, I think, has united all the titles, right? So that's why he's number one on the pound for pound, and he stands right now as maybe the most recognized boxer in the world because he's gone through the process of that. But that's actually because it was done for him by Fury in large part, uniting the belts, getting the belts consolidated to a certain extent. Um, they don't even allow that in many weight classes, you know. So um, my problem with the Muhammad Ali Act is that it was ineffective in doing what they were supposed to do. So it's supposed to call for uh, real medical care, and you've heard me rail about the boxing commissions and the boxing commission doctors and their involvement in the sport and how it amounts to bureaucratic work and paperwork and not, you know, you should what I would look for is a true doctor patient relationship, you know. Um, we've talked about it before, but like for example, the example of Spencer Fisher. So Spencer Fisher fought a fight in the UFC against Hermes Franco, which he says since then, after that, he could never walk a straight line again. His neurology was screwed up from the beating he took in that fight, from the punishment and a cumulative punishment because the guy had a take punishment style. But he fought in the UFC eight or nine times later. I assure you, and Diego Sanchez and his crazy manager that everybody berates in this case may actually be right. I assure you that no one takes the first CAT scan these guys ever put through and takes the CAT scan 3 years later and 3 years later, and nobody does a comparison to see what kind of degeneration there is. Nobody looks at that. All they care about is the CAT scan submitted on the correct paperwork with the correct paperwork on the correct letterhead so they can file it. There's nobody's actually caring for the fighters. Nobody's looking at old CAT scans and saying, look, these masses are here, or these dark spots are appearing here that were not there in the past. This is troublesome. And I'm sure if they did that, that it would eliminate a good handful of fighters. It would be a noticeable number, not just one or two that are showing cumulative damage. Um, what would Chuck Liddell's CAT scans have looked like? You
Right.
know, another guy that dished it out, took it, and then by the end of his career, was having a hard time taking it, and they kept rolling him out there. I'm sure some of those knockouts, some of those first knockouts, because I think he sustained like five in a row, right? Um, some of those first knockouts came with a CAT scan to a suspension that was lifted after another CAT scan. And did anybody compare that CAT scan to his original or CAT scans that got him licensed to begin with? Did anybody care? So the Muhammad, and those are MMA comparisons. I don't have exact comparisons in boxing that I'm as familiar with that I can call on as an example, but these problems probably still go on. And by all I know is, have you seen Evander Holyfield talk?
Right.
Did anybody check his CAT scans? So the Ali Act is paperwork and a bureaucratic answer to something, and in implementation, it never worked. So Endeavor could actually, they said they were going to push to get rid of the LE Act. There may be some benefits for it, so maybe from a business perspective, but I think they can leave it as is and still get what they want.
Yeah. Another thing that I just thought of that you may have missed or not, but that UFC fans are kind of complaining about is that I think it's Mark Shapiro came out. He's with TKO, high-ranking guy in TKO, and was saying the UFC could probably make more money by just doing less shows on the road and increasing the number of Apex shows. And that might be the way they go in the future. Maybe talk about that. I had Wormy on. He talked about it from a production standpoint, where he kind of said, yeah, it would make sense to do it. But what do you think about it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. For again, we know the company only cares about making money. That's why this has even been mentioned. Yeah, because it's yet more proof that if they say that they care about the fighters or that there's competition or something like that, moves like this prove that that's not real. That that's secondary to making money. Um, there is, scaling back an international presence and doing shows in other places. Um, they would obviously keep the Abu Dhabi shows and, every once in a while do a big show in the Garden or wherever, um, the, in LA and places like that where they can monetize truly with a big show and scale back on, the visits to the Midwest and some of the fight night shows that are, not also not headlined by, big names. So they're not huge, they're not pay-per-view quality shows or whatever. Um, but yeah, I think that would eventually do damage uh at some level to the brand. It takes away from, you know, being an international company. It becomes a Vegas company.
Yeah, but in a way, and this is something I was talking to James about. You could almost become a self-sufficient entity. Like if you built your own lodging, for the fighters, maybe you could sell some to fans for a high price. You can stay in the hotel too for this weekend. You know, they could really just become just a well machine out of Vegas and not spend a lot. You know what I mean? Or as
Yeah,
much
but
as they normally would, because it costs a lot to take a show on the road.
yeah, it I think you know, I don't know exactly where have they done recent smaller shows. Like, what would be a place that
Uh,
they
if they do fight nights,
Mil
you're talking about Midwest,
Milwaukee?
Kansas City,
Okay,
Tulsa. They
yeah,
did one a few years ago. They did one. Max Holloway fought on it. He fought Clay Collard. Um, but yeah, they would do them in places that were not as big for sure.
at the end of the day, what happens is the number of people that are able to afford going to a live show goes down by a lot. Tulsa shows, Kansas City shows, there's obviously going to be some locals that are never going to get to Vegas, can't really afford to get to Vegas once you start including how high the prices are in Vegas for lodging and things like that on a hot fight weekend. Um, and so they buy a ticket in Tulsa, go home, and it's just a ticket, maybe some T-shirts and eating out that night and stuff like that. Planning a vacation, taking time off of work to get there, and this type of thing, you're going to cut by a good percentage the number of actual people, the variety of people that can actually watch a show live, that can talk about wow how great it is live or whatever. It will become a sport for elite people, or at least people with upper middle class spending money that can get to Vegas and take a few days off of work every once in a while. Um, and so that has, I guess, you know, it, I think being in even small locations is beneficial. But those benefits, I could see the UFC judging them not to be enough. So yeah, I could see them turning out or turning into just a mainly Vegas-based company in the future. I think we've talked about it also. I mean, they built that event center. It probably takes a phone call to the Fertitas, and the Fertitas can make hotel rooms available for fans and packages and things like that. Or, like as you said, they can build their own hotel on the property and or their own lodging where they can have fans and fighters mix and things like that. And you know, they'll make money that way. They'll uh, be working for a limited audience. You know what you'll see there is you'll see some of the same rich guys showing up for all the big fights, and it becomes a club there, and it could,
Influencers.
yeah, and it could lead to a disaster at some point.
But, and another thing James said was, look, the UFC is a TV show. The majority of their money comes from TV deals and being on TV. He said the people are more props. You aren't going to have these big sweeping views of lots of fans.
Mhm.
But he said at the end of the day, it's not really necessary. It's a TV product. That's where you're getting your money. They're paying for a certain amount of shows. And
Right,
when you have
and those
everybody
sweeping,
works for you, as to where
yeah,
not going on the road and you're having to hire people, he said it's a
yeah,
huge advantage.
and the fan shots are to attract people to the live shows, which you're no longer going to need to attract people to live shows. So you don't need the fan shots.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting topic. A lot of fans are complaining, but another thing James said was like, how many of these people are complaining can afford to go to UFC shows? It's not that cheap, you know?
Yeah. It's changed, and like I said, yeah, and this will make it even less accessible. You know what I mean? Um, Baseball stadiums are still full, NFL stadiums are still full, basketball arenas are still full. Um, and those tickets are unattainable for middle class people usually at this point. Um, Disneyland is also, I
Yeah,
was a family of four has to pay, close to $1,500 to get into Disney World
that's
for a couple of
ridiculous.
days and stuff like that. Um, but they're still full and making money.
Yeah,
So they're not at the threshold where it's a showstopper yet. But this is one step closer to making it an elite sport where, like I said, what you're going to see is you're going to see the same fans show up, kind of like the old days when, like, there were, in the Meyerowitz days where there were very few fans, so all the people that would go to the shows kind of knew each other and stuff, and you sort of start to get even to know the fighters and stuff. Um, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get like a club of people that, yeah, I know him, I know this, this, and it becomes an insiders club.
yeah. They are expanding it though. Now they're going from 500 to 1,000. They could do periodic expansion to see, where they want that number to be. They could expand. UFC has plenty of money. They could do some quick expansion, small expansion here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, they could set up the octagon in the parking lot and do them outdoors and put bleachers around it. See 3,000. So yeah, there's what you James is absolutely right. Obviously, in that once you know the like simple things like you don't even have to pay to move, transport, and build and unbuild the octagon. You can
right.
just leave it there.
Yeah,
That's just an example of one efficiency that will be there. Um, so yeah, once you're trapped or um, relegated to a single venue, there are massive advantages to the production.
yeah. Another thing I don't think I talked to you about that I was wanting to talk to you about was the Strickland fallout from his fight with Dricus du Plessis. Sean Strickland, and I think this is something that is interesting because you know this is the era of a lot of loudmouths. McGregor, Strickland, other people. And I think fans are finally starting to say, look, if you're not going to perform, we don't give a what you say at the press conference. If you're not going to go out there and perform, if you're not going to go out there and make an effort, we don't care what you're saying at the press conference. In fact, it makes us mad that you would say you're going to do something and then not do it. So I think there's some pushback, and he got a lot of it from all different angles. Fighters, ex-fighters, his coach. This is another thing I wanted to ask you about. His coach went on Ariel Helwani's show and basically said he needs to make a decision on what he wants to be. If he wants to be famous and just do some fights, so be it. But I don't. I want to work with champions. If he don't want to be a champion, just let me know. Which was kind of surprising. Not many trainers would do that, but he got it from all sides. So, what do you think about that?
You know, fighting's a cycle. there are many different things and factors going into this. So Strickland was always a hardworking guy and a guy that you can count on to put on an exciting fight. His shit talk wasn't even just limited to the press conferences. He actually would shit talk in the ring and made for entertainment, and people bought into it. Um, Sustainability and how long your act holds up, how long you can keep it up, how long you can keep it fresh and genuine. Because McGregor, making faces got stale for me, you know, towards the end of his fighting. Um, and I think that's what happened to Strickland's at some point. Like I see the social media and stuff, combined with the fact that he held the belt and probably didn't make the huge money, but made enough money that it was a clear difference from the paychecks from 3 years before to the paychecks he was getting when he had the belt and defending the belt. His paycheck for the first Duplessis fight was probably a lot. Was probably good six figures, and receiving a good six figures, you can mess up, buy a car and not a house and do stupid things like that. But definitely, the point is that kicks in a few factors. Making less money in that for a next fight is unmotivational. Add to that the fact, and we went through this in another podcast in detail, the number of actual 5 round fights this guy has under his belt. Full fight, not 5 rounds signed and he got out of there in round two. He goes the distance, 5 rounds, a lot, a lot. And the mileage he has, there are a lot of fighters that show that inability to get off once they start piling on the mileage. And that's what I think you saw there. Um, so I wouldn't criticize. I think, I think that's a big factor nobody's taking into account is that, he's not, it doesn't appear to me to be a prime athlete. He appears to me to be a guy that did a lot of hard work to get to where he got. Um, but once the body starts to deteriorate a little bit, it becomes harder to make it act. And I think that's what you saw there. Is I think you saw that catch up to him against a guy that is still fresh. So I think what you saw was Strickland's expiration date went by somewhere before that fight, and um, I'm sure he intended to go in there and fight, but maybe that adds up. But though the passing the expiration date and the mileage and the money affecting the mindset and things like that is why he maybe isn't his trainers criticizing him and he's not training as much and he's doing other things and things like that. You can't get yourself to focus and do it. You want to examine the factors, and I think in his particular case, it's the motivation of maybe pay cuts after being at the top when he didn't expect to be at the top at the beginning of his career, probably. Um, and then you don't discredit the number of 5 round fights he has. You're talking about hours fighting in the octagon, not to mention that he has a reputation for, in his heyday, not being a soft trainer, not being a guy that goes, we go 50% in training to protect ourselves. That wasn't him either. So I think you saw a guy that his expiration date passed. And now, because of his big mouth and his controversial ways, people saw an opportunity to pile on him, and that's what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I think plus, the other fighters doing it, I think fans are getting tired of it if they're not going to deliver.
Yeah, exactly. He's pissed off enough fighters.
Yeah. Yeah. Last thing maybe we should go over is the eye poke thing. UFC's starting to have this become a problem again. And I was talking to James about it. It's just I can't believe that the biggest MMA entity in the world by a mile, one that is worth billions of dollars, can't solve this problem. Why do you think they can't or don't want to solve this issue?
Yeah, it's bad for the sport when a fight gets canceled because of the eye poke. I can think of the Bilal fight, um, as a prime example of a main event that fell apart, and that's really bad.
Cejudo and
Um,
Song Yadong recently. That's kind of where this came from, and also the
okay,
fight right after that, where God, I forgot the guy's name, but he won by slapping his like two fingers in his opponent's eye, and then he poked him right after that, and then finished him. Yeah, so it's a
yeah, I don't know why they don't want to address it. I think it would be simple to address. Just one line in the contract that says if you lose by eye poke, you lose 50% of your paycheck, period. And if we deem that the eye poke was intentional, you will not be paid. And you'll never see an eye poke again.
yeah. You think it's? I think that it's purposeful. A lot of them, but
Yeah,
other
exactly.
people
I think
don't.
I think I think like in the case of John Jones and some of these guys that use the open hand like this to um measure distance and that sort of thing. Um, they train that way. They train for that. You know, um, I disagree with John Peretti. I think John Peretti is, a forefather and an expert, beyond any shadow of a doubt. But I disagree that, well, there were some works in Pancrase, but I don't think every fight in Pancrase was ever a work. Yet Pancrase with open hands really never had an eye poke. And I think, Japan and the opponents and the spirit of competition was different back then, but it's avoidable because Pancrase is probably the first show on the planet that made it to 300 events. You know what I mean?
It's a good point.
Um,
They fought. They fought with open hand. And
yeah.
they didn't have
Uh,
eye poke problem.
I mean, in order to do a proper palm strike where you're getting the effective use of the full strength of the arm, you have to actually have your fingers way back. But open hands, no gloves in those fights, and no eye pokes in 300 shows.
I'm sure they had
You know,
some, but it wasn't a problem.
yeah, no, you know, uh, like for example, uh, notable striker there, Boss Rutan. Boss Rutan never had an eye poke affect one of his fights. And I think,
No, so
I've watched
that's
enough of them. I couldn't even recall one time where there was even a pause in a fight over an eye poke. Not to me. Like I said, I think at this point, uh, some fighters do it intentionally. Some fighters do it because they're not trying to avoid it. Maybe it's not intentional. Some fighters maybe use it even to get out of a fight that they're not doing well in, they don't want to be in. But that's kind of a hard step, but they're not trying to avoid it. You're training with your open hands, with your fingers extended to measure space and measure distance, and you're not taking into account the possibility of poking your eyes and maybe changing your training, doing something else. You continue to train that way because there's no repercussions
yep,
and there's nobody doing anything about it. So they continue to do that. So it is the fighters as much as the organization are responsible for this every time it happens.
yeah, yeah. Not only is it seems to be allowed, it doesn't go punished, and so why
Yeah.
not do it? Yeah, why
Yeah,
not
we
do it?
just we just haven't had fight cancellations and guys. We haven't had a guy who's really taken, at least publicly, like you know, I guess a famous MMA eye poke is the Yuki Nakai eye poke, right? With Gerard Gordeau,
Hmm.
where Yuki Nakai lost was blind in that eye. People were, you know, he fought twice after going blind in the eye. Fought on that same night. Goes to show the metal and balls the old school guys had. But he also went to great lengths to hide it because he thought that he would lose face. A little bit of a cultural difference with Japanese fighters. But if an American lost his eye sight, it it would, that may be what it takes, unfortunately. Not to be funny, but I wonder what would have happened if Bisping caught an eye poke and his glass eye popped out.
Yeah.
There are a lot of fighters. Like I know Dave Minay, the first ever 185 pound champion the UFC had, um, used to fight with contact lenses in because when he fought blind, he couldn't see punches coming because he was blind, and he fought with contact lenses in, and an eye poke caused his contact lens to slip into the back of his head.
Yeah.
So, and that goes back to ancient UFC times. That may have been 2000. 25 years of eye pokes and problems, and nobody's done anything about it. It's just gotten worse.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy.
And I apologize. I have been adjusting to a drastically new schedule, and I did not see the judo fight. I saw that he was bloody and messed up after the fight in pictures and stuff, but I didn't read or see about that. So I apologize for leaning on an older example, but
Yeah.
it's still happening, right?
Yeah. And yeah, it's just hard to believe they can't address it when pretty much like Bellator addressed it in 2008. It's just
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Like I said, just put in the contract. You'll lose 50% of your money if a panel of 3 experts in the UFC, Dana won. So everybody vote the way Dana wants, but you can pick a random pool of people, deem it to be intentional, you lose 75 or 100% of your pay. So you really are you hit them right in the money, and there'll never be another eye poke again.
Yeah. Well, Miguel, I think it was a great wrap up. It's awesome to have you back on the show. It's been a while. I know the fans miss Miguel on these shows. It's not intentional. He's busy, as he said. It's not that he doesn't want to do it. But
Yeah,
when he
I'm
does,
working
in a way, when you don't do as many and you come back, it's even more impactful, though. So that's the
yeah,
positive side of it.
that big dream of having, a million followers and being a YouTuber for money never worked out. So I'm working actually for a Japanese company, and I'm on a Japanese schedule. So um, it's been hard, a little bit of a hard adjustment working overnight and sleeping during the day kind of thing. So, but I think I got a handle on it. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, Miguel, it's always great talking to you. Everybody, as always, subscribe, support the channel, check everything out that we have, membership, super chats, all that. And until next time, we appreciate it. See you in the next episode.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy Drew with High Fight IQ, and you are now watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with my boys Todd Atkins and Miguel Iturrate. Miguel has been the matchmaker for over 200 shows worldwide and has worked with Hook and Shoot, Euphoria, Bodog, and ADCC. Make sure you subscribe to the Todd Atkins Show on YouTube. You can also find Miguel on his YouTube channel at MMA Collector 74. Don't forget to subscribe to High Fight IQ on all social media platforms. The House Call Sports on YouTube. The Fight Pit on YouTube. Now let's talk some fights, baby. Let's go.